So again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the official announcement of the filing of an act fostering voting opportunities, trust, equity, and security, or as we're all calling it, the VOTES Act. First, a little housekeeping. We do ask that you please keep yourself muted until it's time for questions, and please remember that this is being recorded for additional distribution. So you're going to hear today about what's in this timely and critically important bill, and about why now is the right time to take steps to make our democracy more accessible, equitable, and secure. First, we're going to do real quick, brief introductions from the Election Modernization Coalition. So I'll just name an organization, and if you could just take yourself off mute and real quick introduce yourselves. First, we're going to go with the ACLU Massachusetts.
Good morning, my name is Rasan Hall. I'm the director of the Racial Justice Program for the ACLU of Massachusetts. And the ACLU is advocating for this bill because voting access is one of the most important racial justice issues of our time.
Thanks so much, team. Next, the Lawyers for Civil Rights.
Good morning, my name is Janelle Dempsey. I'm from Lawyers for Civil Rights, and we support this bill in order to amplify the voices of historically disenfranchised communities.
Thanks, Janelle. Next up, the League of Women Voters, Massachusetts.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patty Comfort. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, and the League is working on this bill as a continuation of our last 100 years of work.
Thanks so much. Next up, MassPIRG.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Janet Dominitz. I'm the director of MassPIRG, the Public Interest Research Group, and we believe removing all barriers to registration and voting is in the public interest.
Thanks so much, Janet. Next up, MassVotes.
Hi, my name is Alex Salakis. I am the Policy and Communications Manager at MassVote. And we support this bill for the many reforms it includes, such as same-day registration, which we have pushed for a really long time, and we want to push it over the finish line this year.
All right, thanks so much. Next up, the Massachusetts Voter Table.
Hi, my name is Julia. I'm here on behalf of the Massachusetts Voter Table, and we're here to continue advocating for voting access.
Thanks so much. And finally, Common Cause Massachusetts.
Hey y'all, I'm Christina Mensick. I'm the Assistant Director at Common Cause Massachusetts, and we are excited about this bill for many reasons, including that it will continue to dismantle barriers to voter participation, like our registration deadline and those faced by eligible incarcerated voters.
Thanks so much, everyone. And I'm Jeff Foster, the Executive Director at Common Cause Massachusetts. So quick background, the Election Modernization Coalition that these organizations make up is over 10 years old, and we've had great success over the last decade working with lawmakers to improve voting and elections in Massachusetts. We quickly changed our focus last year as the reality of the COVID-19 pandemic settled in and the election was approaching. So I'm going to quickly pass it to a few of our coalition partners to briefly share about the work we did last year heading into the fall election. So first off, Patty from the League of Women Voters, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So as Jeff just mentioned, at this time last year, we all believe that we were well on our way to passing same-day voter registration, something that the coalition had been working on for nearly a decade. And as everyone knows, 1 month later, with the onslaught of COVID-19, we shifted into overdrive to instead deal with the fact that the current election laws in Massachusetts would preclude most voters from safely accessing the ballot box in the September primary and the November general elections, which were only a few months away. So between late March and the end of June, we researched, wrote, and passed the Safe Elections Bill with legislative leadership from Representative John Lawn and Mike Moran, and Senators Eric Lesser and Harriet Chandler. And then finally, Governor Baker, I shouldn't say finally, very quickly, Governor Baker signed the law, signed the bill into law on July 6th. So pretty great work, if we do say so ourselves.
So with less than 2 months between the passage of the 2020 reforms and September 1 state primary, both advocates and officials knew that we had to immediately confront any issues related to the implementation of these reforms as they arose. When, for example, Secretary Galvin failed to mail out vote-by-mail applications to the state's non-English speaking voters in a timely manner, we pressured him to do so. We also stepped up our advocacy in communities where voters accidentally received the wrong party ballot or never received a mail ballot at all, even though they requested one. We did this by cooperating with the city and town clerks, as well as lawmakers, to ensure that voters knew their rights. I now turn it over to Christina to talk about what some of our advocacy looked like for the 2020 general election.
Thank you, Cheryl. So again, with very little time to spare, we had to mobilize a comprehensive and broad public education and direct outreach campaign. It included text banks almost every day, phone banks, LTEs, op-eds, ads, and I know Mass Vote ran some safe, socially distanced door knocking to turn out the vote in Boston. Our shared goal was to ensure that low propensity voting communities had equitable access to information about these reforms and their safe voting options. There were many challenges, and we had to be very adaptive. Just one example is that in the face of attacks on the USPS and rampant misinformation and disinformation about our elections, we had to pivot our messaging to encourage folks to identify their secure Dropbox and other safe in-person voting options. We trained volunteers to do social media monitoring to combat misinformation and disinformation online. The short is that the reforms that we passed and all of the work that we as a coalition put into direct outreach paid off. We set record voter participation in the general with 3.6 million votes cast and 76% of registered voters participating, which was the highest number in 30 years. Our takeaway is one, that our elections officials this year were real heroes. The success of our fall elections is thanks to them. But it is also thanks to reforms that removed barriers to voter participation. And our lesson learned is really that the more we make voting accessible, the more people participate. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jeff.
I'm actually going to pass it over to Rasan now, who's going to talk about not just how the Votes Act is good for democracy, but how it really helps advance the cause of racial equity in Massachusetts. Rasan?
Thank you, Jeff. As many know, communities of color continue to be disproportionately underrepresented in our electoral politics. And the provisions of this bill that you'll hear more about will remove the barriers to voting that oftentimes impact some of the Commonwealth's most marginalized communities. National studies have shown that early voting and same-day voter registration increase participation in communities of color, and particularly in Black communities. Mail-in voting was certainly a benefit to the communities of color that have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID pandemic, and continuing that provision will ensure that those same communities will be able to continue participating at such high levels. Participation in the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, increases and maintains the accuracy of our voter rolls and further discredits the misinformation surrounding voter fraud claims that is often leveled against communities of color. And finally, given the disproportionate representation of Black and Latinx people who are held in custody pre-trial, it's ever more important to ensure that they are not disenfranchised and provided access to the voting process that they are legally entitled to.
Thanks so much, Rasan, and thanks everyone for that update. We had a great year last year, but as we know, the work continues, and that road has led us to today to talk about the Votes Act. So again, as mentioned, thanks to the leadership of Senator Cream, Representative Lon, and their colleagues in the legislature, a bill was passed last year to expand mail-in voting and early in-person voting. This expansion led to a dramatic increase in voter turnout and was extremely popular with voters. As of today, the clock runs out on those expansions on March 31st, which will have an unfortunate effect on municipal elections, some that start as early as April. So the Votes Act couldn't come at a more important time. So real quick, the bill does many important things that will bring our democracy forward. It makes mail-in voting permanent. It makes early in-person voting permanent for at least 2 weeks before Election Day, 1 week before primaries, and the local option for local elections. It allows voters to apply for mail ballots to be sent permanently to their home until they choose to cancel. It provides local options for drop boxes, early processing of mail and early in-person ballots, appointing poll workers if there's a shortage, and to opt out of checkout tables. It maintains the registration deadline as 10 days before elections. It implements same-day voter registration for all elections, including early in-person voting days. It requires all correctional facilities to appoint someone to administer the distribution of voting information and ballot applications and to collect the materials and then report on all activities to the Secretary of the Commonwealth. It implements risk limiting audits to maximize the public's confidence in election results by requiring an audit that can only be concluded after there's a 95% or above confidence in the accuracy of the hand-counted ballots. Finally, it clarifies the 2018 automatic voter registration law and ensures back-end opt-out options for voters registering through the RMV and putting a 6-month deadline for the Secretary to implement ERIC and to fix our mail application portal by June 2022. This is not just a recipe for safe voting during COVID. This is a recipe to bring our democracy well into the 21st century. And so now it's my honor to introduce the lead sponsors of the VOTES Act. We have both Senator Cindy Cream, the Majority Leader of the Senate, and Representative John Lahn, who's been the most recent House Chair on the Joint Committee on Election Laws. Representative Lahn, I hand it over to you first.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for being here today and for your advocacy for election reform. I'm very proud to work with Senator Cream on this. And as many of you know, last year, the legislature took the initiative to put in place expansions to voting to make it safer during the COVID-19 pandemic. These expansions were very successful for public safety, public health, and for democracy overall. We expanded mail-in voting and early voting, in-person voting. Both were very popular. We even saw a 400% increase in voter turnout in the state primary election last September. These expansions were initially made to be temporary, but we're excited today to announce our intention to make them permanent. I was pleased to join Senator Cream in the Senate last session. She has been a great partner, and I'm excited to partner again with her to introduce the VOTES Act, which seeks to strengthen access to the polls for all voters moving forward.
Thanks so much, Representative. And now pass it over to you, Senator Cream.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Representative Lahn. I too look forward to working with you. I've been proud to work with Common Cause and other members of the Election Modernization Coalition to craft this comprehensive legislation to expand and increase voter participation and modernize our election registration system. Expanding voter participation is critical to ensuring that all voters are heard in our democracy. And after everything our country has been through last fall, this is the time for the Commonwealth to consider these bold measures and protect our democracy. This past election shows that allowing voter options like vote by mail, early in-person voting, and expanded voter registration only increases voter participation. And it does so while maintaining an efficient and secure election process. These reforms should be adopted for all future state elections. The VOTES Act will make voting by mail and early in-person voting options permanent. And it will finally have been trying for so long to make same-day voter registration the law of the land, an issue that certainly I have worked on. No eligible voter should be turned away at the polls due to an error in voter registration information. This provision will allow voters to update their information while they're turning out to vote, a process that will make our poll book and our registration system much, much more accurate. The VOTES Act also makes sure that anyone who is incarcerated, jail, or prison, and who is otherwise eligible to vote under current law is actually able to vote. Voting is a way of participating and feeling part of a community and can play an important role in a successful reentry from prison. Additionally, over half of incarcerated people in Massachusetts are pretrial and still innocent. They should be able to vote if they want to. This is not a privilege, it is a right. The bill requires sheriffs and DOC to provide voter information to their populations and will be required to provide all eligible voters with mail-in ballot applications a secure location to vote, and then report on their activities to the Secretary of State. These reforms are needed now, especially as we continue to deal with COVID. Heading into a special election in March and municipal elections as early as April. In fact, I have filed separate legislation to continue these voting options for local elections past March 31st, when the current law expires. These reforms will make our voting system stronger, more secure, and more equitable. And again, really, I want to thank all the members of the coalition for their hard work and passion in crafting this wonderful, equitable bill. Thank you.
Rep. Lawn and Senator Cream, thank you both so much. I know it doesn't need to be said, but I do want to reiterate the coalition's full commitment to the VOTES Act and really committing all of our resources and time to make sure that this bill gets passed quickly so that our democracy and voters across the Commonwealth can be that much stronger. You've both been outstanding leaders in this space, not just on this issue, but you've been tremendous partners to work with. And so we couldn't be more pleased with your lead sponsorship. And we're really excited to get to work. So with that, I'm happy to now open it up to our partners from the press who've joined us for a Q&A. And folks on the coalition and to our lead sponsors, feel free to jump in and respond as you see fit, depending on the question. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free, please just unmute yourself and feel free to jump in.
I had a question. I'm a reporter for New Boston Post. I wanted to ask, just in terms of civic engagement, is there any concern that a bill like this, when, you know, there's been many polls that have shown people don't know who their governor is, a lot of people don't know who their state rep is and state senator, that you might have a less informed electorate as a result?
Would anyone on our team like to take that? I'm happy to. So I'll share that. I think there's a lot of confidence that the VOTES Act is a very logical next step that the legislature can take, given their leadership in 2018 passing a comprehensive civic education bill. I know there are a lot of groups and young people that worked with the legislature to get that done, and we're just starting to see it implemented in classrooms across the Commonwealth. So I think we're really excited to not just see that we're reducing barriers, but that also this is in tandem with great legislation to make sure that our next generation of voters is well informed. Thanks so much for that. We have Steph.
Hi, thank you for hosting this. I just wanted to double check. Can you elaborate on which provisions originally came out of the 2018 law or are related to enforcing that 2018 law?
Does anybody want to take that? David?
Hi, I'm David Sullivan. I'm on the Common Cause board and helped to draft the bill. I think you mean the 2020 law, right? The law that the
ERIC system and some of the other things from the earlier 2018 law. I just want to make sure. I mean, obviously there's the 2020 law that's the big focus here, but there was sort of the requirement to join the ERIC system and make some other improvements from the 2018 law, right?
Sure. I mean, the requirement to join ERIC has been around for actually several years before 2018. What this bill does is simply to set a deadline of almost 18 months away for the Secretary of State to do what he should have done a while ago. But that actually dates from before 2018.
That was passed in 2014 in that big omnibus bill.
That's right.
Eric?
Yes.
Anyway, and also the automatic voter registration law. That's part of it.
Yes.
Hi, this is Crystal Haynes from Boston 25 News. I just had a question. There was concern prior to the 2020 election or in the 2020 election process about town infrastructure and towns not having feeling like they had either the financial support or the infrastructure support to be able to manage mail-in ballots. I don't know if any of you all could speak to what resources would come with this bill and what kind of changes need to happen on the municipal level to make this possible and successful.
Thanks, Crystal. Would anyone like to take that? Janet?
Well, let me say a couple things. First of all, we've talked to city and town clerks about this, and this partially reflects their input. Secondly, I think we recognize that the state is going to have to reimburse cities and towns for the costs that they are going to encounter as a result of increased mail voting. That, of course, began last year with the bill that temporarily required that. As we know, the state local mandates law requires the state to pay for any additional costs that it imposes on cities and towns. The state auditor is in charge of doing that. We will certainly work with the auditor to make sure that cities and towns are paid the amounts that they're needed through legislative appropriations to pay for the increased staff and other resources that they will have to commit to make this work.
Hey, this is Nick with Boston.com. I had a question on the same day registration. I know this has been something that obviously advocates have pushed for a while. Secretary Galvin has supported it for a few years. And I think it passed the Senate in 2014. So I was just kind of curious what in the past have been and this is maybe a question for both people on the advocacy side and the legislatures, but what's been the, I guess, the biggest barrier for passing same day registration in the past, and what is different now that gives you guys confidence that it will pass?
I can say something from the legislative point of view. I can't speak for both branches, but when we passed the wonderful bill that we did in 2020, I've been an advocate and I've been filing same-day registration for a long time. But there was some concern that we were asking the clerks to initiate a brand new process, early voting, that we had COVID, that we didn't know if it was all going to work, early voting, whether mail-in ballots were going to be a problem. And frankly, I got the feeling that they just couldn't do the same-day registration at the same time. But what we did in 2020 has been enormously successful. I know municipal clerks that have called and asked if we could make sure that they'll be able to do this in their spring municipal elections. So I think we are ready. And like everything we say in life, there's a time for everything, a time for every season. And I think that this is the time. Definitely this is the time now.
Well, this is Janet Dominitz from MassPerg. I mean, the 7 groups in the steering committee of the Election Modernization Coalition, I hope I'm not being presumptuous by saying, we share this sentiment that in Massachusetts, we have the resources actually to be first at a lot of things. And we are now, we will be number 22. 21 other states and Washington, D.C. have same-day registration. I mean, with all due respect to Senator Cream, it's not time. We're late. We're very late. So we really look forward to working with Senator Cream and Rep. Lawn, maybe to send that message a little more gently. But between all of us here, Massachusetts is very late to the same-day registration game.
I would just like to say and follow up, and I think Senator Cream is correct. What was the biggest challenge of same-day voter registration, as in a lot of other legislation that was difficult under the COVID, was putting too much pressure on our city and town clerks. And we really did partner with them throughout the process, and they really stepped up to an enormous challenge in 2020. If maybe some of you remember, during the House debate of the election bill, there was an amendment to do same-day voter registration that was voted down overwhelmingly. So I still think there as much as I'm very supportive of this, we've still got work to do with some of our colleagues who didn't think it was the right time, which was most of us. But that, we do have some work to do with some other legislators getting on board with 7-day voter registration. And, I look forward to working with Senator Cream and all our colleagues, both in the House and Senate, to get this forward this session.
Thanks so much, everyone. Are there other questions?
I just wanted to add in to help push this along. We know from turnout last year, the top 10 states, that the highest turnout, all of them had same-day registration. So we know that it's an effective measure.
Well said, Cheryl. Thank you. Other questions from our friends in the press?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had another question. Crystal Haynes from Boston 25. I was wondering if, Cheryl or Rasan can speak to or expand upon what they were talking about with the racial equity piece, and how, because I'm thoughtful of the 1619 project with the Urban League in trying to combat voter suppression. So how would this piece of legislation work in tandem in that process to make sure that racial equity is in place? And was there an issue at all that you all may have heard of during the 2020 election cycle?
To the second question, there wasn't anything that we were made aware of as far as voting irregularities or voter disenfranchisement as it relates to communities of color. That said, those are the same communities that have historically been underrepresented in the electoral process. And, studies have shown that when voting access is expanded or increased, there is a substantial increase in participation. And there are a bunch of historical and societal reasons why Black folks, Latinx folks who are disproportionately poor have less access or are less engaged in the voting process. So by eliminating the voter registration deadline and allowing people to vote the day that they show up to the polls, that makes it easier for a lot more people. By increasing access to mail-in voting, those are other barriers that get removed. Our disproportionate representation in the criminal legal system, where people, as Senator Cream pointed out, people who are held pre-trial are detained, presumed innocent, are still eligible to vote. They don't have access. And one of the significant issues, particularly in communities of color in areas like the city of Boston, is that there are longer lines. And so when people have to wait in lengthy lines, and you saw this in a lot of other states, but we also saw this in Boston in past elections, where people are waiting 2 and 3 hours to cast a vote. You remove those barriers, you improve access for folks.
I'll just add in here, yes, the vote by mail bill was extremely successful last year, but due to a lot of the mistrust that's out there in the communities of color, lower incomes, and new citizens, particularly around the mailing system last year, I think the extended early voting was absolutely a critical piece. And I'm happy that we are pushing that forward again this year.
Thanks so much, Crystal. Thank you for the question. Mindful of time, but want to make sure we get all questions in. Are there any other questions?
Jeff, can I just correct something I said a minute ago? This is David Sullivan again. In response to Steph's question, the ERIC requirement, that's the Electronic Registration Information Center, does date from 2018. And what our bill does is to set a deadline for the secretary to join ERIC, which is a really important updating and anti-fraud provision for June of next year. So the effect of this bill is to set a deadline for what was passed in 2018. Thanks.
But notwithstanding that, back in 2014 is when we passed ERIC to be implemented in 2016, and that didn't happen. So we had to have an additional bill to ask the Secretary of State to implement it. Right, David?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh.
Can I jump in? This is Chris Lisinski from the State House News Service. Just one last question for you guys before you wrap up, if you don't mind. Obviously, your unveiling today is coming a day after the Secretary unveiled his own package, and I know that Senator Becca Rausch has her own bill out that's got other components such as local option ranked choice voting and shifting the primary up to June. How do you see this bill you're proposing as fitting alongside both what the Secretary did and what Senator Rausch did? Do you think that any components in either of those two other packages might get folded into omnibus legislation, or do you, have any thoughts that they're not going far enough or going too far?
I'm happy to defer to our sponsors if you want to take that first.
I'm happy to speak.
Oh, I'm not.
Yep.
Yes,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead, Representative Lon. I think you were first.
So thank you. I did briefly, obviously see and spoke with Secretary Galvin. I think a lot of the bill here we're filing and speaking about today covers most of the stuff that he has and some more. So like any legislation that gets passed and working with, the 7 or 8 election bills that we had in the election committee last year, we will take a look at all bills and pull out whatever makes the most sense and what the most we can build consensus on to put forth a bill that we can move the Commonwealth forward on election laws. So I think everything's on the table from every good idea that's out there. And so I look forward to working with our colleagues on that and all of you to take the good ideas from everyone's proposal and try to move it forward.
So I just want to add something to that. For the 2020 bill, we worked really hard with Secretary Galvin. He certainly has the ear for how local clerks are able to deal with the bill. I know that I thought what he did is say what he wanted. I didn't see that he actually filed a bill. I hadn't seen it. But in any event, I've worked with him before, as Representative Lon has, and he's an integral part of this system. He has to make it work. We have to write the law. I mean, it is the legislature, not anyone else, who has to pass the law. But it only works with whoever has to implement it. And Secretary Galvin is a great person to work with. And we absolutely were not in different places. We're going to come up with a bill that he loves as much as we love. As far as other ideas, I think the bill that you see in front of you was a bill that was worked on by a coalition of people who felt at this time that this is what worked. As Representative Lon says, there'll be hearings and there'll be lots and lots of ideas. And we haven't heard from the public, and they're very important. Our constituents will come to the hearing and they may have an idea we haven't even heard of. But for the purposes of what this coalition, and the members of this coalition, a lot of people that really, really care about voter participation, the bill that you have before you is a bill that everyone is comfortable with. There's lots of good ideas. Some are lofty, some work, and some don't. But what you have today is something we all feel comfortable in. I know that Secretary Galvin will be on board with whatever we do.
I would just love to add, it's very important, which we did through the process of the election bill in 2020, to work with our cities and town clerks to make sure that this works on the local level. Because as Senator Cream said, a lot of our ideas, can be lofty, but we get into the weeds of it. We must be respectful and hear from our cities and town clerks and work with them so that we can make sure that these are all implemented and work. So that's important.
Great. I would just add, I think we celebrate that this is clearly a very popular issue. We expect more legislators to file things related to expanding voting. And so we're just really excited to be working in this space. And again, just really appreciate you, Rep. Lon, and you, Senator Cream, for your leadership on this and all your leadership last year, helping to get to this point. And for many years, making sure that Massachusetts is continuing to push forward to make sure our democracy is as inclusive as it should be. So with that, any final questions?
I would just like to make one last comment, sorry, is I know working with the Speaker, the Chair Ways and Means, Senator Cream and Senator Spilker and Barry Feingold on trying to extend to our the end of June, the election reform bill that expires at the end of March. So that is something we're working on. I've been on phone calls all week and last week trying to make sure we get this move forward. So we're trying to figure that out and to get that extended and then work on passing this bill as quick as we can. So I look forward to working with Senator Cream on that and the House and the Senate to get that accomplished so that many of these municipal elections will be able to do vote by mail coming up in April and May.
That's a great update. Thank you so much, Rep. That's really great. Well, Steph, go ahead.
Sorry, and forgive me if this is a little redundant. I just want to make sure I have the proposed process right. Can you guys go over again one last time whether there would be an opt-in or an opt-out for the proposal of sending ballots to folks' homes, if as far as that being automatic or anything like that?
Let me take that. So what the bill says is that for the first time, you can file a permanent application for a mail ballot. So right now, under current law, you can ask for an absentee ballot for all elections in a given year. Because we're going to all mail ballots, this would allow somebody to say, I want to apply for mail ballots to be sent to me indefinitely until I say otherwise, or of course, until I move or for some other reason, I'm not a registered voter anymore. So that's the change that this bill makes.
Got it. And that would continue unless or until someone opts out or is no longer
Correct.
a voter at that location.
Correct. We're not sending ballots to everybody automatically. That's not the proposal. The proposal is to allow someone to apply so that they can get ballots mailed to them for every election until they cancel.
Got it. Thank you.
Can I also just clarify super briefly with Rep. Lawn, just so that the press is following correctly? You're talking about extending the reforms that end in March through June as a separate step, a separate short-term step, and then pursuing this broader package in the longer term. Is that correct?
Can I just answer that for a minute? I filed that bill as a separate bill. It's already been filed. It happened in the budget in 2020. Representative Lawn and I actually worked with the Secretary of State to draft language that would allow that to happen through the budget. We couldn't get a bill passed, so Rep. Lawn and I put it in as a budget amendment, and it expired March 31st. So I think what the intention is that it would be separate. I didn't mean to preempt you, Representative Lawn, if you wanted to add anything.
Nope, exactly. Thank you, Senator Cream. Yeah, so the intention is to extend that was put in the budget from Senator Cream, the extension from March 30th to June 30th, so that these municipal elections can be vote by mail. So we're hearing from a lot of cities and town clerks who are anxious about, planning for this for the April, May and June elections that are coming up. So that's something that we're immediately trying to just extend to the end of June 30th.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. We really appreciate everyone coming out. Senator Cream, Representative Lawn, thank you for your leadership. Really excited to continue to work with you all to get the VOTES Act passed quickly. And again, for our friends in the press, Christina, would you mind putting in the chat real quick a link? If you'd like, we have a link here to a Google Drive folder, which has all of our contact information, an outline of the bill, and the language of the bills themselves. So if that'd be a helpful resource, we're happy to provide that for you all. And we welcome any follow-up if you have any questions after we end this call. So without anything else, thank you all so much for coming out. We're really excited. We're going to get this done quickly, and we appreciate everyone's help to make sure that Massachusetts moves forward with our democracy in a meaningful and powerful way here. Thanks so much, everyone. Look forward to the next steps.